Okay, and we're live. Hello, all, and welcome to this third and final WSET Events Hub webinar, run in partnership with Conseil Interprofessionnel du Vin de Bordeaux, where we will learn 5 facts about Crémant and Rosé in Bordeaux. If you would like to find out more about WSET, please visit wsetglobal.com for further information about our courses and qualifications on wine, spirits, and sake. WSET offers best-in-class beginner to expert level qualifications in the drinks trade, where you learn wine tasting skills, winemaking theory with knowledge on wine regions and grape varieties around the world. My name is Sophie Ko, and I work in the Europe, Middle East, and Africa Business Development Department here in WSET, and it's a pleasure to be your host today. This webinar will be recorded and available to watch via the WSET Global Events Hub on YouTube. Post any questions that you might have in the Q&A box below, and we will try our best to cover as many as possible at the end. And it is my pleasure now to welcome back Sabine. Sabine Silvestrini is a third-generation oenologist and wine grower of Vignoble Silvestrini. The winery comprises 36 hectares in total in 3 of the most prestigious appellations of the Libournais: Lusat Saint-Emilion, Montagne Saint-Emilion, and Pomerol. Sabine is also an accredited Bordeaux educator with the Bordeaux Wine School. Thank you very much for being with us here again, Sabine. I'll let you kick off.
Thank you, Sophie. Well, I'm very glad to be with you again to speak about Bordeaux wines and the 5 facts you have to know about Rosé, Claret, and Crémant de Bordeaux. So, of course, we're going to have a quick introduction, speak about Bordeaux today and in overall colors, and focus tonight on the claret wine, the rosé wines, and the sparkling wines that we call Crémant in Bordeaux. So thank you again for joining us. Just to focus on Bordeaux and see the specific or general data, I just wanted to remind you that it is a vineyard which is the largest AOC vineyard in France, with about 110,000 hectares, so pretty much 270 acres. We are about 5,500 wine growers, and the wine business is really based on selling wine to mainly wine merchants. There are about 300 wine merchants, 77 brokers to help the deals between growers and merchants. And we have about 29 cooperative and 3 unions of cooperative, which could make wines and sell wines for the growers. Talking about the production, of course, we produce both red grape varieties and white grape varieties. We are probably well known all around the world for our red wines, but we also produce white grape varieties. And tonight we're going to focus on the claret and rosé that would represent about 4% of our production, and also on sparkling wines, which only represent 1% of the production. But you will see that it's changing a lot in Bordeaux. So let's keep going, and just reminding that we are producing, of course, 2 different colors of grapes, and out of those grapes, using our red grape varieties, we are able to produce some Bordeaux Rosé and Bordeaux Claret. I assume that you all make the difference between a Rosé and a Claret. They were both established in 1936. The area for the Rosé is about 3,500 hectares, when it's only 400 hectares in claret. And well, you have the accurate production in bottles, but it's an average production, of course, and the maximum yield allowed is about 50 hectoliter per hectare. Before I explain you what they are like, I just wanted to show you what they look like. Just need to switch my camera so I'm sure that you can see the color. So I have a question for you. Which one is the rosé? Which one is the claret? Do you have an idea? I know that with the background, it's not so easy. The most important for you to remember is the difference of color. In my right hand, this is the rosé wine. This is what we call the claret wine. Both wines are meant to be drunk quite fresh. And the main difference between the two is a matter of maceration. This would be made out of a direct pressing, when this would be made out of maceration. It needs skin contact for, let's say, 48 hours to 72 hours. So that's the main difference. So those two wines are Bordeaux wines. This one is a rosé, this one is a claret. Both wines are meant to be drunk quite fresh, but we'll speak about this quite further. Just to focus on the sparkling wines, it's also important to say that it's one of the most recent appellation in Bordeaux. It's been created in 1990. The average area is about 255 hectares for the rosé, when it's a bit more for the white sparkling, with 563 hectares. And we'll explain, of course, or I will explain, of course, the different grape varieties for you to understand better how we produce those wines. So just to keep going on with the next slide, I have one question before we go any further. To your opinion, the Crémant de Bordeaux and Bordeaux Rosé appellations cover the entire Bordeaux wine region. Do you agree with that? Is it true or false? The answer was true, of course. It's like we spoke about it last week, talking about dry white wine. For the Bordeaux wines, you could produce Bordeaux wines anywhere all over the area of Bordeaux. So wherever you're located, either in the Médoc, in the Grape, on the right bank, in the Blaye region, or in the Pomerol region, you are allowed to produce AOC Bordeaux. And of course, claret is an AOC Bordeaux, rosé is an AOC Bordeaux, and Crémant is also an AOC Bordeaux. So basically, to show you where we do produce the most rosé and the most sparkling, here are the maps, just for you to understand that the appellations span all the vineyard area. The actual production are much more focused on cooler climates. It means cooler soils, and we have mostly clay and limestone soils, either between the Dordogne River and the Garonne River, or on what we call the right bank. So that's why all the rosé would be much more produced, I would say, on the northern part of the Garonne River and up to the northern part of the Bordeaux vineyard. And the sparkling wines, so the Crémant de Bordeaux, would be mostly produced between the two rivers, the Dordogne River and the Garonne River. And we also have some estate who would produce some Crémant de Bordeaux in Côte Appellation. So, or the Côte Appellation area, I mean. So this is for the location. So this is very important to understand, that to make some great rosé or to make some great Crémant, we definitely need to keep the freshness and to keep the vivacity of the nose and the fruitiness on the nose. And the soils are very important for that. When we talk about the grape varieties, of course, it's also important to understand that to produce rosé wines or claret wines, we are meant to produce red grape varieties, of course. So just for you to know, a range, of course, of well-known red and white varieties are allowed in Bordeaux. To produce the claret, only the red grape varieties are allowed. So you can pick any of the 6 grape varieties allowed: the Merlot, the Cabernet Franc, the Cabernet Sauvignon, or the Malbec, the Petit Verdot, and the Carmenère to be able to produce claret wines. They could be either varietal wines or they could be blended wines. It's really up to the grower. For the rosé, there's a little exception. Basically, we are not supposed to blend red wines with white wines to produce rosé. That's the rule all over France for the AOCs. In most rosé, you can still use in a very small percentage some of the white grape varieties. And in the case of Bordeaux rosé, you have the right to use at the maximum 10% of one of those 3 grape varieties, which are the Sémillon, Sauvignon Blanc, and Sauvignon Gris. But most people producing rosé in Bordeaux would mostly focus on red grapes and do direct pressing to obtain their rosé wines. So remember that for rosé and claret in Bordeaux, the most important are the 6 red grape varieties that we are allowed to produce. When we talk about Crémant de Bordeaux, you all know that to produce Crémant in France is what we call the traditional method for sparkling wines. So when we speak about, so of course it's 2 fermentation, one in tank, one that takes place in bottle. So they are both natural fermentations. And of course, like it is the case for Champagne, like it is the case for any other Crémant around the vineyard of France, we are allowed to use both, either white grape varieties or red grape varieties. So of course, in the regulation to produce Crémant de Bordeaux, whatever the color is, if it is a rosé or white Crémant, of course, we are allowed to use the 5 main white grape varieties that are allowed in Bordeaux, but also the 6 red grape varieties. It's also important, I think, to remember that all of our red grape varieties are grape varieties with white flesh, which helps you, of course, to understand that we can still produce white sparkling wines, even though it's red grapes. So that's, I think, very important to understand. So those grape varieties are all allowed for the sparkling wines. To give you an idea on the production of rosé and Crémant, it has increased, like it has doubled for the rosé, and it has been multiplied by 11 for the sparkling, for the Crémant de Bordeaux in the last 10 years. So this is really a production that is very trendy at the moment, it's very fashionable to drink either rosé. It's getting more common to drink claret as well, even though that's really something that you could find specifically in Bordeaux, sometime in some places in Paris. But those 2 wines are getting more and more common and are developing very well. So it represents 4% for the claret and rosé and 1% of the production for the sparkling, the Crémant de Bordeaux. Then, of course, we can't speak about those wines without speaking about how to appreciate them. So the rosé that we produce in Bordeaux are quite pale and light to dark, depending on the grape varieties that are used. It's very important, I think, to understand that most of the Bordeaux rosé, or the people who want to produce Bordeaux rosé, would now dedicate really some plots to produce rosé. It's just unbelievable that you could produce both a great rosé and a great red wine out of the same plot, because of course we don't expect the same maturity from the grapes to produce either the rosé or the red wine. So most of the people who are really focusing on rosé now, they would dedicate some of their plots specifically to make rosé, and they would use the direct press. The claret, it's pretty much the same. Like people who want to produce some claret, even though it's a maceration for 48 hours, you don't expect the color to extract as much as for red wines. So of course, people who would produce the claret, which is more like a bleeding off technique, to obtain this concentration in color, it's still clear, it's still meant to be drunk fresh, and people would focus on the freshness of the fruit and the acidity, which is very important when we don't want any tannin in the claret neither. For sparkling ones, the plots would be harvested earlier and they have to be picked by hand. That's something very specific for the Crémant de Bordeaux. So nowadays, some chateaus are really exclusively dedicated to some of those 3 different styles of wines. Of course, when would we appreciate those wines? We could appreciate them as cocktails. The rosé is very easy to drink, like for a break or for an aperitif. And we truly love the claret for the way it could pair with food, because it's much more like a gastronomy style of wine. So I truly wish that one day you get a chance to taste those wines. I know that the claret is not so easy to find, but definitely once you taste it, you'll love it. So thank you very much for your attention. And I just wish you have some question for me.
Hello, thank you very much, Sabine. I found that really, really fascinating. There's, if anything, yeah, I mostly have quite a big gap in my knowledge, really, about Crémant and Rosé and Bordeaux. There's not much that I know about this field. So this has been an absolute treat. Thank you very much. We have a couple of questions,
Right.
and although it was pretty much covered around the presentation, what would you say would be, could you clarify the main difference between a rosé and a claret?
A rosé would be a direct pressing. So this is, and to obtain this clear color, of course, you try to avoid as much as possible the contact between skin and juice. So what we do, we pick early in the morning, make sure that it stays quite fresh and well protected against oxidation. The grapes would go straight into the press, we press the juice, separate them from the skin, and that's why we have so few color in the rosé wine. For the clarets, we still have to put the whole bunches or the whole berries in tank. So it looks more like a red vinification at the beginning, at the really beginning, because of course we destem, we crush, put the berries into a tank for about 48 to 72 hours. So it enables the skin contact between the juice and the skin. So we have a little bit more color, we have more concentration in aromas and fruits, but still we don't want the tannin to get into the juice. We still want to have something very soft and easy drinking. So we would bleed off the tank after like 48 hours, pretty much, that's an average, to be able to keep this freshness of the fruit, the acidity, and of course, we don't want to have much tannin in the claret. So one is made out of a direct pressing, when the other one is made out of a maceration and the bleeding off.
Thank you very much. And following up on, we've got quite a few questions about claret actually. So, and who are some makers of claret that we should look for? Any notable producers?
Well, it's difficult, you know, for me to say, because of course there are many family estates that would produce their own claret, and there's one cooperative which is really well known in Bordeaux and specialized in rosé and claret. It's the cooperative called Quinsac. Quinsac is a location, but the cooperative from Quinsac is one of the main producers of claret wines. But then you have so many estates that could produce some claret. Of course, it is a small production regarding the size of the vineyard and regarding, you know, the people who are producing some claret. Most of them would have a whole range of Bordeaux wines. They would have maybe their red Bordeaux, they would have their rosé, their claret, their dry white, maybe some sweet white as well, or some Crémant de Bordeaux. So I can't really tell you one name more than another one. It's also a matter of quantity they do produce. But for sure, the bigger producer in Bordeaux is the cooperative called from Quinsac. Sorry.
Thank you for that. And for the next question, how much of claret production is exported to international markets?
Well, I'm sad to say not enough for sure, just because the production is such a small production. So it's really like what we call in French a niche market. You know, it's difficult, you know, to cover the word with claret because it's too small in volume. So even in France, like it's not so well known elsewhere than Bordeaux. So I truly don't have any data for the export on claret. And sadly, I would say that you have to come and visit us to taste the claret.
Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah.
And our next question is, what would you say is the most commonly used red varietal used in Crémant?
Yes, it's very common. It's quite rare to have 100% white grape varieties for white Crémant. It's really rare. Most of the time you would have some Cabernet Franc or Merlot, surprisingly, because definitely the Cabernet Franc or the Cabernet Sauvignon, they make great sparkling wines. Merlot, because it's rising much more in sugar and will be more matured, could be more tricky to get the perfect maturity to make sparkling wines, but definitely most of the sparkling would have some red grape varieties in it. Yeah.
And we've got a question regarding the labelings on the bottles. Would the labeling state rosé or claret, or would it use Bordeaux, Bordeaux Superior, or any other AOC?
Well, there's no Bordeaux Superior for rosé and claret. Bordeaux Superior is an appellation only meant to represent either red wines or sweet wines. So with the name, well, the AOC Bordeaux Superior is either for red or sweet wines. Then, so it would be written, I can't show you the labels of the two bottles I had today, but one is written Bordeaux Claret, the other one is written Bordeaux Rosé. So it has to be written this way. So it's written on the label to help you to make the difference between rosé and claret. So we would say Bordeaux Claret and we would say Bordeaux Rosé.
Oh, here's quite an interesting one regarding the use of ice in rosé wine. When we were in the Rhone region, this was called piscine. Can you comment on the use of ice in rosé wine?
Well, I'm not too keen on the use of ice, so I definitely think that the rosé and the claret are meant to be drunk at a perfect temperature, so cool, of course, or fresh. So definitely we can put the bottle in an ice bucket, but definitely not too keen to put some ice in the wine. If you can find another way, just do it. Like I would use the, I guess you know the granite stone, the one you would use for whiskey. That's the one I would use for my rosé or my claret if I don't have a fridge nearby. So definitely, of course, it's important to drink them fresh. That's how we appreciate them all, or the most. But it's much better to cool them down with something else than, of course, ice, because otherwise it would melt and dilute the quality of your wine. So definitely we're not too keen on that.
And our next question is, would you say that the value of vineyard areas for rosé, claret, and Crémant are lower?
No, well, no, definitely not, because basically it's the AOC that is valuable. So when you buy a plot to produce either rosé, claret, or sparkling, it could be also used to produce red and dry white Bordeaux. So the value of the land really depends on the AOC. And so never mind what kind of color of wine you make AOC Bordeaux within this plot. So that's the most important. So there's no difference. Even if you buy a plot that used to produce red wines and you want to use those red grapes to make claret, it wouldn't change the value of your wine, of the plot, I mean.
And a follow-up to a winemaking question regarding claret. After it's been bled off, does the rest of the wine then continue macerating to make a red?
Yeah. Yes, it does. Actually, that's a very ancient method. Like historically, we used to produce claret to concentrate our red wines. So what we would do is put the grapes in tank, wait for a couple of days before we bleed off the tank. This way we change the proportion between the juice and the skin. And of course, the juice you leave in contact with the skin would be much more concentrated in color, in tannin, in aromas. So that was used, like the bleeding method was used for that. Now, of course, we don't want to waste the must. So even though we focused on producing claret, if we still, and we will still have some must and some juice capturated into the must after the bleeding, of course, we would produce some red wines out of those must. Yeah.
Okay. And our next question, did I understand correctly that you can use up to 10% white in a Bordeaux rosé, despite the law against making rosé with a blend of red and white in France?
It's not a blend of red wine and white wine. That's the difference. Make the difference. We are able to use 10% of white grape varieties. I'm not saying that we are able to mix white wine, 10% of white wine with 90% of. So in the regulation, it is written this way. I don't know anyone making some rosé with white grape varieties, but it is in the regulation. So that's why we assume that you were all professional enough to know this kind of information, which make a difference. Just for you to know, for red wines in the Rhone Valley, in some of the appellation in the Rhone Valley, they are allowed to use some Viognier in their red wines. So it means that in a certain quantity, they would be allowed to use some Viognier, which is a white grapes, to produce red wines. But we're not talking about adding white wine to red wine to produce rosé. So of course it's still, so just for you to understand, is we could have like 95% of red grapes in the press and adding 5% of Sauvignon Blanc, for example, press it all and obtain the juice. That's what it means.
Thank you very much for clarifying.
You're welcome.
And here's an interesting one regarding sort of like vineyard plots in Bordeaux. For people who want to reserve plots for making rosés, do they usually prefer making inexpensive red wines in a generic AOC appellation, or do they prefer making rosés now?
I guess it's really a matter of market. I'm just trying to think. I don't know anyone in Bordeaux producing only rosé. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist, but it's people who do have some plots in Bordeaux AOCs. Most of the time, they would build a whole range with red wine, rosé wine. And I think that there is a market for both, actually. So it's difficult for me to say that it doesn't exist, but I wouldn't say that people would prefer to produce rosé instead of producing red wines. It's definitely not the same style of wine. It's definitely not the wine that you would taste at the same moment of your day, you know. So there's enough room for both style of wines. And I guess that people producing AOCs Bordeaux nowadays would rather have a whole range of colors instead of having just one single color, which is much more risky in terms of market. You all know that we are, you know, quite submitted to the climate and the weather. So it's much more tricky when you have just one single color.
Okay, and what would you say is your personal favorite food and wine pairing for a claret?
Well, I love claret with sushi. I love claret with Italian food because it's, you know, there's not much tannin. It's really fruity. It suits very well with dessert based on red fruits, strawberry, raspberry. It's really, really nice style of wine.
Excellent. And I'm also quite conscious about time, and we're just going to go on to our last question of the day for now. For those who we didn't manage to get to, many apologies. And our last question for today is, what would you say would be the biggest difference in style and flavor profile of Crémant de Bordeaux as opposed to the other popular sparkling regions of France?
Well, the grape varieties, yeah, there's no way we could produce the same style of Crémant because we don't have the same grape varieties. So it's difficult to compare them like to Crémant de Loire or Crémant de Bourgogne or the sparkling you could find in UK, or there's so many sparkling wines around the world, but definitely the style is a matter of grape varieties we use. And we have wines that could be very rich in aromas, very not so acidic, so it still have great freshness. That's why we use so much Cabernet in Cabernet Franc or Cabernet Sauvignon in our sparkling wines. But it's truly really difficult to compare to the others. We should have a tasting of them all and then compare them, but I've tasted lots of sparkling in Bordeaux, and they could have their own character, of course, depending on. I've tasted some 100% Sémillon sparkling as well in Bordeaux, which is totally different to a traditional Crémant de Bordeaux with Merlot and Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet. So difficult to say.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that, Sabine. And
Thank
that's all the
you.
time that we have today. Thank you so much for watching. And again, thank you, Sabine, and to the CIVB for putting this session together. The recording of this session will be emailed to everyone along with a short feedback, and you'll be able to watch it back on the WSET Events Hub on YouTube. And you can catch up on all the previous events as well as the previous sessions of this series, which looks at red wine and white wine as well. And to find out more and to sign up for our wine qualifications, please visit our Where to Study page at wsetglobal.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you.